All right. You know what it is. You know who it is. We're back. Welcome back to the BG Perform podcast. A little bit upset about last night. My man Paul Hughes put on a fucking show last night. Whooped this dude's ass and didn't get the decision. And it's a lot to break down. I don't want to break it down in this podcast, but it's that was a tough one. I really thought he did everything he could to win that fight, and it stood out. Like he took it to this dude who was like such a huge favorite. He's one of the Nurmagomedovs. He's undefeated. It made this dude look like he was he was hurt. He was gasping for air at the end. Um, yeah, but I'm proud of Paul. Paul's one of those standout clients. Like he's just one of those people that like does the work, doesn't complain, and he's like a true professional. So I'm very happy for him. I'm very happy he got to show the world what he can do. And like I think that was another one of those performances, just like Ian's, that the world like thinks better of them because of it. And the decision might not
Mhm.
have gone their way, but even last night, like looking at the people that were tweeting about Paul, Dustin Poirier was like, "That's a fucking scrapper." Like people like that who were watching the fight, being like, "Yo, Paul's legit," and Paul's only 27, you know. So I had to start the podcast with that because it's been on my mind. But today we're gonna be talking about rest that goes along with the sets and reps. If you've been paying attention to this little series we've been doing in the last couple podcasts to start this year, we were talking about sets and reps, we were talking about exercises, things like that. But now we're going to be diving into the rest section of that, which I think truly is one of the most important aspects of programming. And I think Jerry can agree, because it can really change things, right? Like it can, when we go back to the last episode and we talk about sets and reps, the rest time can enhance that and give you like a better stimulus, or it can ruin that and take away from the actual stimulus that we're trying to achieve. Today's episode is going to be, kind of the finishing touch on this to give us a little bit more of uh, I guess like an overview of everything. And then the next episode, what we'll kind of do is we'll go through and go back into everything we talked about just to kind of, put it all in a, I guess like a better presentation for you guys so you have the idea. Anything to add to that?
Just don't forget the timer.
Don't forget the timer. That's what I was doing right now.
Don't forget the timer. That's the only thing.
I will say, I want to let you guys know beforehand, the service is not great here. I'm back in Brazil, and the place I'm at, the Wi-Fi isn't great. It cut out on us a little bit sooner. If it does cut out, bear with us. We're gonna do a 30-minute AMTAP today, as much talking as possible inside of 30 minutes. Jerry, are you ready? I'm gonna assume that's a yes. Jerry, are you
I
ready?
am.
All right. Just making sure I'm not losing you here. Three, two,
Oh
one,
yeah, I said I
and
am. You've been kind of cutting out a tiny bit.
go. All right. Well, we'll see how we can do this. But so when we talk about rest, we talk about
Yeah, watch the
implementing.
timer just not make everything
Yeah,
work.
just fucking dies. When we talk about rest and we
Oh,
talk
big
about
delay.
breaking down, is there?
Yeah, between you and me, yeah, but that's okay.
Okay, we'll figure it out. We'll take the rest that we need in between. Um, so rest periods can drastically
All right.
change. Are we good? Oh
You're
man,
completely frozen on my screen.
is this gonna go out for me
But now you're
again?
back. You're back.
Back?
A little bit.
Is it breaking up?
You're back. You're back.
Okay.
A
Rest.
little bit, but it could be worse.
Oh wow, this is a nice delay. This is gonna be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, this
Hold
maybe
on.
maybe you do most of the talking and I'll just come in when I need to. This way we keep it seamless.
All right, we'll do what we can here. Rest periods can drastically
Yeah.
change a workout and take away from the stimulus that we've gone at, right? And when we start to look at the ins and outs of programming, like episode one, we talked about all structuring the program throughout the week, days of the week, and then we talk about the stimulus that we're trying to achieve along with that. Then we break down the sets and reps and what those look like inside of a training session. The rest is obviously this last little piece that gives us the breakdown of, how much energy we're going to have going into that next thing, right? When we start to look at strength training, right? As a whole, when we start to look at breaking down strength training in its most important fashion, I guess, right? The it it can be make or it can be increased or decreased by the rest. So if we're going for heavy sets, right? If we're going for heavy weight, we don't want to have short rest periods because we're not going to be able to fully maximize the output that we have inside of these sessions, right? And if we're doing aerobic sessions, right, or conditioning sessions, we don't want massive amounts of rest in between because then we're missing the stimulus of what we're trying to achieve. So rest periods, like I said, this is why they're so important. This is why we need to understand the true importance of the rest time inside of the exercise. And if we look at the reps and set schemes that we did in the last training or the last podcast, right? We talked about like the traditional ones. So we have 5x5, 4x6, 3x8, 2x20, those types of accessory or sets and rep schemes that we go through. The rest that we recommend for each is it's going to allow us to fully maximize the sets while being able to keep the stimulus at hand, right? So if we look at the foundational sets, like which I just went through, we have the 5x5, right? And this is more of a traditional strength set and rep scheme. So this is where we're going to be really pushing the weight, really pushing the overall load of the session, and we're going to want a lot of rest with that. And if you're looking at if you're working at anywhere between 85 to say 95% of like your one rep max, most people won't know what that is or that number exactly is. But what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to figure out like exertion, like how much are you pushing, right? If you're feeling like, wow, that was the hardest set I've ever done, that's when we're going to want to creep into that 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes of rest. And if you see high level power lifters or high level Olympic lifters or high level athletes who are doing very high CNS or high output work, you're going to see these huge rest pieces in between or rest intervals in between so they can recover and repeat, right? You're not going to be able to lift your true 90% one rep max consistently if you don't have enough rest in between that. And you see this often, like you'll see, CrossFitters, you'll see these types of individuals who are like, oh, well, I can lift 90% multiple reps. And the reason being, it's not their actual 90%. It's their 90% working inside of about, it's their 90% working about 90% of their actual max of 100%, if that makes sense, right? So, normal person, say your bench press at, with rest is 315, doing it inside of like a CrossFit model, right? It might look more like 295 and they're working at 90% of that 295 as opposed to that 315. And that's why they're able to kind of continue it for reps over the course of like a long workout, right? What we call it is like a uh sub maximal max load, I guess. We could kind of categorize it as that. Jerry, let me know if you're catching all this, if there isn't a too much.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it.
Cool. And if you have anything to add, just come in. So with that 5x5 set and rep scheme, we're going to need time, right? And I think this is something that I see too often, people do in the gym is they're going for these strength sets and they're resting a minute in between each set. And then they're not giving themselves the time to actually properly recover, properly catch their breath, let the heart rate come down and be able to actually produce that force again. Especially if you're trying to put on muscle, especially if you're trying to increase force production or increase speed, you have to give yourself enough time in between these sets, right? Once we have that broken down, then we're actually, and we can understand how much rest we need. And again, this could be anywhere from like 2 minutes to like, 5 to, I guess we could even say 10 minutes for some things, right? Like an even bigger range where if you're really pushing yourself, like, and you're truly pushing yourself, you're going to need that rest. You're going to need to take that time, slow down, catch the breath, let the muscles relax so you can go out and hit that set again. And especially in like sprinters or, we're talking about even the runners and things like that, you're going to see somewhere between like a 5 to 10 minute rest for some of these things just because they are so high output and high CNS driving that we need it, right? Then as we start to move down, we talk about like that 4 to 6 traditional strength work rep and set scheme. This is where we start to really kind of keep it within that 2 to 3 minutes, right? I know it's only one more rep per set and one less set per session, but this is where, we're still keeping that output high. Those reps will add up. So over the course of a session, you're going to do, maybe one less rep in that session for a given movement, but the output's still there, and it's one more rep inside of each set, right? So again, this one even might lean towards the 2 to 5 minute range as well. But we're keeping it inside that range because this is where we want to work on the traditional, like I want to get stronger, I want to put on size, I want to cause CNS adaptation, and that requires you to give your all inside of these sets, right? So from here, this is where we start to talk about accessory work, and this is where we get, the 3 by 8 to 10, or the 3 by, 10 to 15, whatever it might be, right? Really, the range might be like 3 by 8 to 15 um, reps, right? And this is where we can start to bring the rest down a little bit. We can start to keep, as low as 15 seconds in between, like supersets, and then maybe a bigger rest of like 90 seconds at the end, or we're going like a minute after each of these sets, because these are ones where we want to cause adaptation, but we also want to build some tolerance, or I guess resistance might be the word, to fatigue, right? So as we do maybe a set of 15 on like a face pull, we rest a minute, a set of 15 on a face pull, rest a minute, set of 15, right? And that's because this is a little bit of a different stimulus. And with the accessory work, these are smaller muscles. They're not going to be able to lift as heavy, right? And in an ideal world, if we're actually going to define accessory work, it's going to be work that supports the main movement that you're trying to do, right? In some people's training, that might be a squat. In some people's training, that might be a sprint. In some people's training, that might be fighting, right? Whatever that main thing they're trying to do, the accessory work is looking to improve qualities that are going to help them with what they're trying to get better at. And that's the important thing. So at the end of the day, with the accessory work, my range really for that is anywhere between like 30 and 90 seconds, right? And that's ideal because, like I said, we want to keep the pace a little bit higher with those. We're not fully maximizing any type of load. So we can push the pace just a little bit and make sure we're getting through those sets a little bit quicker and still maximizing everything else that we do, right? From there, we have the last kind of like traditional set and rep scheme that I wrote, which is 2 by 20. This might be for, a different type of accessory, what are we calling it? Like load movement, where we're going over maybe, you know, hamstring curls, quad extensions, anything that's a little bit less intense that we might want to go through and just work through the body. Just basically to get like a little pump, get blood flowing through the body. This would be anywhere again from like 30 to 60 seconds, 30 to 90 seconds, somewhere in between that range where we're keeping them a little bit lower. We're not going to be fully recovered, but we're going to learn to be fully recovered enough that we can still complete the sets at these ranges, right? Now, with that being said, actually, let me ask this, Jerry, because you've been listening. Is there anything from there that you'd like to add?
I mean, the biggest thing that I was thinking of is there are obviously like goals that we're aiming for, and typically when a coach programs rest, especially if it's longer, some people will be like, "Oh, I'm ready to go. Do I really have to do this?" Sometimes your readiness, based on your heart rate, is not what we're looking at, especially for those really heavy movements. So that's something to look at. But also, if you change the rest period too much, you're losing the out or the result that you're trying to achieve. So just one of the biggest things is like as we're explaining this, know that there's a rhyme and a reason, and we're going to explain all of it. But just rest period. Sometimes if you're feeling ready, just know that sometimes you need a little longer
Yeah, but
to
also
recover.
like I think that's a good point. But I also think like if someone's coming through and they're like, oh, and they're doing actual true strength work and they're like, I don't need more rest. It's like, well, then you're probably not going hard enough, right? Like you're probably
Yeah,
not
yeah.
pushing the pace enough. And I think that's important to note. Like if you're going through like a full strength exercise and you're actually trying to put on strength, then you need that rest. And if you feel like you don't need that rest, then you need to be either going heavier or we need to be changing the session around because this is another thing too. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about our how we lay out a week. When we talk about training, some people aren't able to fully access the full output of their central nervous system, right? So a 5 by 5 might just not be beneficial to them because they literally just can't go heavy enough for it to actually get the benefits of it, right? And I think we have to be aware of that because if you're not at that point yet in your lifting career, then we need to change it so there's some aspect of strength work in there, and that might be more reps, that might be more sets, that might be, whatever it might be, but those are the two big ones. It might be more volume overall as opposed to more output. Then we need to change that, right? And if you're doing those high output set or high volume sets, you're going to need more rest, right? For those first two kind of set ranges where we're actually working on strength, hypertrophy, anything like that, if we're at the end of those sets and we're like, oh yeah, I could go again in a minute, then it's like we're probably not pushing them hard enough and we need to be
Mhm.
pushing them harder, right? As for the
That's a
accessory,
great point.
yeah, and again, not to discount what you said because it's not discounting it. It's just that like,
No, that's true. Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's I know that like if I have a 2 to 3 minute rest period, sometimes that like I'll look down at the clock and it'll say 30 seconds. I'm like, all right, I got plenty of time. And then I'll look back down and it's like 2:45 and I'm like, oh fuck, how did that
yeah,
happen so fast?
yeah,
Like
and that's when you
that's
know.
when you're really pushing the weight.
Yeah, and you might need more rest. And that's the thing is like a lot of these heavier sets, like if you actually want to make adaptation in the body, you have to force it to, right? Not
Hmm.
like CT Fletcher type, like I command you to grow type shit. But like
8 hour
you're
arm day for
yeah,
Rich
but
Piana.
yeah. But like you're going through and you're actually forcing your body to push past that threshold and then bring it back down with rest and recovery and then do it again, right? That's how we create adaptation. There is one set and rep scheme I forgot, which is like speed or power work. This depends on, what we're doing exactly, but with a lot of stuff, the way that I was kind of shown and the way that I learned it was through these higher speed and power sets. It's short rest, high output, right? So it's very low reps, maybe like 1 to 2 at say like a 50 to 60% load, and even we might even be looking at accommodated resistance with a band or a chain or something like that. And we're doing 2 reps fast, explode, rest. 2 reps fast, explode, rest. 2 reps fast, explode, rest. And we're doing that for 8 to 10 sets for maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 reps, right? And that's just keeping the speed high. We're not getting anywhere where we're fatiguing the body. It's just really all central nervous system because it's fast, explosive movements. So we should really kind of be able to recover in that 30 to 60-second window, come back and do that again, right? Now, the one thing I want to say, this is all very general, right? And that's kind of been the theme of the last couple episodes, not because we don't have the answers for the specifics. It's just the fact that when we look at this, we don't know unless we're looking at a certain person, right? For me, I respond better to like heavier types of load. When I look at higher output, meaning like speed or force, I struggle, right? So I need more rest during that time. When I go for like strength, I might only need 3 to 4 minutes to actually fully recover because of my background in fitness, right? But these are all just general capacity things that we can talk about with an individual that if they want to actually improve their training session, the rest here is actually super important that if you do this correctly, it can change your program. You'll get way better results, right? But we can start to see how, hopefully you guys can start to see as you listen to this, how the rest times can actually give us an opportunity to enhance each type of training, right? With the accessory type work, again, accessory work tends to be more hypertrophy based, right? So think of higher reps, lower sets, really kind of like elongated time under tension in these sets with less rest. And that's kind of the quintessential like hypertrophy model where we're really start trying to cause inflammation, damage to the muscle so that it has to respond by uh, repairing and growing, right? When we're doing like true strength exercises, we're not really causing we're causing central nervous system adaptation a lot of the time, right? But we might not be causing like maybe you can explain this better or make sure I'm explaining this better, but like doesn't cause the actual like amount of micro tears as we would at like a hypertrophy based training session, correct?
I'm not gonna lie to you, this train just went by. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts. Could you repeat that last part?
So I said
Because
the
you were cutting out on my end a little bit, and then the train went by and it honked like probably 8 times. So I'm
okay,
sorry.
it's okay, it's okay. No, I was saying so when we look at strength training versus accessory work, and we look at accessory work as a whole, accessory work tends to be leans more towards like the hypertrophy
Oh,
training,
yes.
right?
Okay.
And
That's why you
hypertrophy
said muscle.
training,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
hypertrophy training, the whole idea around hypertrophy training is more creating damage to the muscle fiber, causing those micro tears and causing the muscle to grow, right? Whereas high level strength
Yeah.
training is more about the CNS adaptation and force production, which doesn't necessarily cause those high amounts of micro tears and damage to the muscle, but
Hmm.
it causes more of a ability for our body to produce force.
Yeah. So with especially with the higher rep schemes and like going into the hypertrophy stuff, you're getting a lot of those muscle tears, but you're also getting much more of a metabolic response. So you're gonna feel the burn. You're gonna feel like a different type of fatigue. Like let's take the bench press, for example. If you're going bench press for anywhere from like those lower, like 5 and below reps, if you're hitting a fatigue level, you'll probably feel like you're not fatigued, but you'll go to push the bar and it doesn't move. That's how you know you're hitting like central nervous system failure. And then if you're doing like a dumbbell bench press, let's say you're doing like 10 to 15 reps and you start to feel that burn, you're like, oh my gosh, I can move the weight, but it's like hurting. That's how you know, like, that's a really good sign of what type of stimulus you're shooting for. And those higher rep ranges, while they cause that burn, or I'm sorry, those lower rep ranges, while they don't cause that burn, it doesn't mean that you're not getting anything out of it. It's just a completely different type of stimulus you're shooting for.
Yeah. So again, that's the thing that we want to start to look at. And if we start to kind of go back to the first episode we did, and then this look at the second episode, and now we look at this third, the first one being kind of laying out the schedule, second one being sets and reps, and the third one now being rest, right? If you follow these principles and kind of listen to each of them and now put the pieces in, right? So we go a 2 day a week model, 3 day a week model, 4 or 5 or 6, whatever it might be. Then on that second one, we lay it out in a way of sets and reps, meaning our first couple exercises are the ones where we're really high output. The next couple are more accessory based, and the last couple are a little bit more, again, accessory based or core work or something like that. It's a little less skilled, right? And the speed or power work being in front of the highest output movements, that type of thing, which we'll talk about a little bit more. You can now see where the rest slots in. So after those sets and reps, we have our rest. And that's going to, like I said, really kind of give us specifics on the stimulus we're going to achieve inside of those sessions. And you can see if you do a 5 by 5 at 90%, and then you do a percentage of, say, or a rest time of 60 seconds, how you're not going to be able to either, you're probably not going to be able to complete that, or you're not going to get the most out of it, or you're just not going to be able to push the same amount of weight for all sets, right? Which means you're not going to get that strength stimulus that we're actually looking for. Um, yeah, and I think that, like, again, heavy strength work requires a lot more rest to recover and to be able to complete the same output. The accessory work isn't as demanding, obviously, and it's not going to require as much rest, so to give the same output, so that's why it's a little bit less. And ideally, when we talk about this in conditioning as well, like, because I mentioned that as well at the beginning, you know, what you're going to see in conditioning, especially aerobic type pieces, is you're going to see these longer bouts of training, right? So you might see something anywhere between like 15 to 30 minutes for like a general human. And one of the things I like to do inside of the conditioning, especially for like general population, is we'll work our way at 30 minutes, and you're just gonna push yourself for 30 minutes at a sustained nasal breathing pace, meaning you're just breathing through your nose the entire session. And then from there, basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna break that down more and more until we get into, it might be like a 5 minute range instead of 30. But as we break it down, that rest in between is going to allow us to just take a little bit of rest, right? And it's not going to be 5, 10 minutes. It's not going to be, you know, uh, these long bouts of rest. It might just be a minute, right? Where we go from 30 minutes to 2 rounds of 15, right? So at the first week, we went 30 minutes at like a sustained pace. So think of like a 30-minute bike ride, right? Then the next week, we do 15 minutes, rest a minute, 15 minutes, right? And the goal is with those 15 minutes is to increase the pace from the 30-minute one, but we're doing two separate ones with rest in between. So we should be able to maintain a little bit of a higher pace throughout, right? And I'm not going to go through all these, but just a couple. Then the next one might look like 10 minutes, rest a minute, 10 minutes, rest a minute, 10 minutes, right? And we're going to increase that pace through there. Now, the goal is as we go through, that rest is just enough to kind of bring our heart rate back down and allow us to keep a little bit of a higher pace. And as we work our way down, that's how we start to improve that pace and build like true sustainable efforts inside of that, right? Now, if we look at the flip side of that and we start to look at sprinting work or lactic work or um, even like alactic work to a certain degree, you know, that's where we might need a little bit more rest because that's kind of the same ballpark as those high strength movements, right? So think of like a 5x5 with like a 10-second max effort sprint type deal, right? Or maybe like a 15 to 20-second max sprint type of deal. And the reason I say that is because you're getting a similar CNS stimulus, right? So you're getting a very similar response from a 5x5 that you would a sprint or, an extended sprint. And oftentimes, if you guys, this might be a little bit too far outside the normal spectrum, but someone like Ben Johnson, for example, who was an Olympic sprinter who worked with this guy, Charlie Francis, a lot of the times before his sprint sessions, about 2 or 3 days before he would sprint in the Olympics, his coach Charlie Francis would have him do a 1 to 3 rep max bench because he would get that same central nervous system response as if he just sprinted, and it would keep him prepared without damaging the legs or causing any unnecessary stress in the legs for him to then go out and he was the world record holder for the 100 meters, I think it was a 100-meter sprint, for the longest time until
Hmm.
Usain Bolt broke it. And those are one of those
Yeah.
things where when you start to look at that, you ask the question, well, why would someone bench at, say a 1 to 3 rep max clip and then do that I guess in what's the word I'm looking for? Drawing a brain fart here. Um, like in
So you said,
switching,
why would
right?
somebody?
Like like you asked the question of like how does comparing a bench to a sprint make sense, right? And it's that
Mhm.
output. And that's the biggest thing we need to start to look
Yes.
at, like the output. The output from the bench is similar, very similar CNS response to the output to the sprint, right? And you get that same
Hmm.
reaction in the body, which then helps you kind of push out over time, but you need rest with that stuff. And if you look at like a high level sprinting program, or any people who listen to this that might have sprinted in college or done track and field in college, you're not going 400 meters and then resting 30 seconds and then going 400 meters at a full clip, right? It's usually something around 400 meters with 2 to 3 minutes, even maybe 5 minutes of rest sometimes. Or, you're going for
Hmm.
these short bouts, high output, and then you're resting for even up to 10 minutes, right? And I've seen even as much as, I think it's been like 15 minutes of rest I've seen for some of them when you're really,
Hmm.
really pushing. And that's just how it goes. You need that rest. You need the ability for the heart rate to come down, your body to relax. And you have to understand too, with a lot of these sports, when we start to look at this stuff, part of specialization or individualization is understanding, how much rest do they get inside of it, right? And it doesn't mean you have to totally kind of cater to it, but you have to understand, like, okay, what type of sport does this person play, right? And if we're talking about football, if we're talking about, let's say sprinting, if we're talking about not hurling, uh, what's the ball one?
Shot put.
Shot put, things like that where it's full max effort and then you're resting, right? There's a little bit of rest in between. Like if you look at football, football is a long game, right? There's 4 quarters that are 12 minutes apiece or 15 minutes apiece. I don't remember what it is. But that's over 4 quarters. It's a lot of game time. But the average play probably lasts around 10 seconds. I'd have to look at what the average play is,
Hmm.
but that's a very like short, explosive sport. So you'll see a 10-second play and then a little bit of a rest, 10-second play and then a little bit of rest, right? Only towards specific times will you see like a no huddle offense where these guys are going and going and going and going. And that's when you start to see a lot of these bigger guys start to have problems. But when they're not, they're very explosive. And if you look at like NFL athletes, and there are some of the most anomaly of athletes that you'll see, especially like the linemen and the D linemen and the linebackers, because some of these guys are, you're talking 300 plus pounds and they're running like, you know, 5 second 40-yard dashes, which is nuts, right? And
Freaks of nature.
yeah, and they're so explosive, but, obviously they're not going to be able to sustain that power output for a long period of time. So, you know, once the plays get going and there's less rest and they're not able to catch their breath, you see it struggle, right? And you see why in late in games, these no huddle offenses are so important, right? But we're not talking about football. We're talking about fitness, right? So it's just an idea of breaking it down so you guys can kind of see like a real life example of it. But to kind of summarize all this, we might be a little bit early. We might be done before the clock runs out today. But to
I'm gonna
summarize it,
add one more thing to it
all
after
right,
you're
cool.
done.
Well, actually, if you want to go now, go ahead because I was just going to summarize.
It might be in the summary, but I was gonna say the key thing to take away is we've been saying like training the CNS or training the muscle while you can't like only train one because they
Yeah,
they do work with each other. However, you can really drive the result to be in the direction of one or the other. So the rest periods do affect that, but another thing that Brandon said was the output. So you were mentioning the sprint earlier and the bench
right.
press. The you can obviously we talk about hypertrophy and muscles all the time. You can still work on the size of your nervous system. As you train it, your nerves become thicker. It might start off looking like pinky in diameter, but a nerve can end up looking like a thumb. So that's how you get more of that output. So when you're training it, you're just training the power source of your body essentially.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that's important to add on top of that is that, you know, oftentimes, like Jerry just said, like you can't really, I mean, you can isolate things, right? But you can't like it's not like, oh, I'm just going to go work my nervous system today, right? But I
Yeah, it's
will
not
say that
100%
like
one thing.
I will say that there is a lot of things that happen in our lives that can still cause like nervous system responses, right? Whether it be stress, whether it be traumatic responses, whether it be, things that like that. And I don't know if I don't know the exact details of it, so I don't want to speak like too much on it, but they've done they've looked at like when people are in prison and they're in that high stress environment all the time and they don't work out as much, but their testosterone rises and their muscle mass gets bigger. And it's a response to being in this very like high stress environment all the time, right? And this is I'm not saying to go into a high stress environment and get jacked,
Go to
right?
prison, get jacked.
What I'm saying is it's like you also have to be aware as we talk about this stuff, the CNS is something that can be affected outside of the gym, right? And we've talked about this a lot with lifestyle, recovery outside of the gym, things like that. So it's really important when we start to kind of break this down on a higher level that, when you look at these last three episodes, you look at how you organize a program, you look at the sets and reps, and then you look at the rest time as well is you look at what's going on in your life, like are you stressed outside of the gym? Are you not recovering outside of the gym? Because this is all going to affect everything we've talked about, right? You might need more rest because you're so stressed, right? You might need less sets and reps because you're so stressed. You might not be able to push it as much because you're so stressed, right? And this is something that we need to kind of pay attention to, need to look at. And I think, if we look at it in that way, we're going to be able to understand this a little bit better. So, I hope that this episode helps in regards to understanding the rest and understanding where it should be.
Welcome to the 54th annual Hunger Games. Dude, I can't not hear the Hunger Games when I hear that fucking song.
That's so
Dude, I
funny.
just picture them all the what do they call them? The not candidates. What are they called? All the
Tributes.
part all the tributes. Yeah, just coming out all at once on like
The
their what are they they're like
platforms, yeah.
chassis with the horse,
Like the
whatever the hell you
platform.
call it.
Chariot.
Yeah, they all just come out putting on a show.
Yeah.
Chariot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I hope this kind
Oh
of
my
gives you guys a good understanding of where everything kind of fits in here, where its place is. And if you don't, obviously ask questions, let us know. We'll be able to help you with that and guide you along that process. And yeah, I think the next episode's either gonna be, I guess let us know. I'll put out maybe a poll on Instagram too, like if you guys would rather see us do kind of a summary of everything, so we talk about everything in one episode, or if you guys would rather us just kind of move on to the next topic. And the next thing I wanted to dive into a little bit is conditioning. I want to dive into the differences between, aerobic, like health conditioning and performance conditioning and how they differ and how we can utilize them for both, even if you are an athlete, and how you can utilize both to stay healthy and obviously improve your overall capacity in the sport. So, yeah, anything to add to that, Jerry?
No, sir.
I hope this episode didn't glitch, and I hope it actually sounded nice. seemed like it was okay.
It did a little bit, but we should be good. Like I was able to follow most of it.
All right, I don't know how
So
it's gonna sound on my end. Hopefully, because I'm recording, it's only recording my side, and it's not gonna pause as much.
that's what I'm hoping. Yeah.
Every time you spoke, it was fine, so we'll see. But I
Okay.
appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.